I begged her for an ounce of her strength so that I could put one foot in front of the other.
Tonight on 2020, an unbreakable bond between mother and daughter, but someone came between them.
He's like, Mom's dead, and he just kept repeating, Mom's dead, Mom's dead.
I ran downstairs and was hysterical and started vomiting.
She was found laying right here.
And I said, well, you can go right over there because that's the person that killed my mom.
But just who was she pointing at?
This is a delicate question, whether somebody that she was having an affair with could have
Sure.
had her killed.
He started thinking about ways to engage his exit strategy,
To get rid of her.
to get rid of her.
Hold on, he's coming out.
Tonight, a daughter's discovery of family secrets and scandals leading to a dramatic showdown.
Drop the gun! Drop the gun!
Behind the scenes, Kim was nonstop digging for answers, getting proof.
Now, a new courtroom development as we take you inside her obsessed 6-year crusade to catch the killer.
What kind of crimes?
We're talking murder.
2020 tonight going into a dangerous underworld no one could have imagined.
Drugs and a lot of money, inevitably a murder of April Kaufman.
Before this hour is over, there will be another shocking death. But is that the end of the story?
This is my life, and I feel like this is the worst made-for-TV movie on the planet.
Good evening, I'm Amy Robach.
And I'm David Muir, and this is 2020. And here tonight, Deborah Roberts.
WIBG, it's the talk of South Jersey.
Driving the corridor between Atlantic City and Philadelphia weekdays between the hours of 2 and 4, you may have heard this voice on WIBG FM.
If you don't vote, I will find out. I'm going to your house. I'm dragging you outside.
That's the no-nonsense April Kaufman, a peppery, provocative radio host.
I love being here to bring you the truth. As unvarnished, as unpretty, unbuttered on the biscuit it is.
Tackling topics from politics, caring for U.S. vets.
Homelessness is a big issue in our country right now for our veterans.
Listeners couldn't get enough of the Jersey girl with the platinum hair, big smile, and high wattage personality.
She was like a whirlwind. Like, she would come in and she would make a lasting impression on everyone.
In her upscale town of Linwood, New Jersey, not far from the boardwalk, April and husband Dr. Jim Kaufman, a prominent endocrinologist, are the community's consummate power couple.
The two of them were well known individually as well as together. They really wanted to be involved in the community, but they also like to have some fun.
Every day, the doctor and Mrs. Kaufman had a familiar routine. Jim heading to his medical practice before sunrise, and then a standing phone call with April at 8:30 a.m. But on Thursday, May 10th, 2012, that call to April goes unanswered. And after several failed attempts, Dr. Kaufman sends over his handyman to their home on Woodstock Drive, where he discovers a horror.
911, where's your emergency?
Yes, I have my bosses down. She's lying on the floor in her bedroom and not answering.
Okay, where are you, sir?
2 Woodstock Drive, Linwood.
Okay, hold on, I'm transferring you.
47-year-old April Kaufman found dead on the floor of her bedroom. With the family handyman on with 911, Jim calls Linwood police.
This is Dr. Kaufman. I just got called by my house person that my wife is face down on the floor.
My partner's sending out the ambulance as we speak.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm getting there as fast as I can.
Detective James Scopa took me inside the home where the wealthy socialite who once lived larger than life was discovered dead, shot multiple times.
She was found laying right here.
Face down.
Face down.
As the media got there and they started to realize who it was, that's when they knew, okay, this is really a story. It was chaos.
As the steady whir of helicopter blades begins swarming the sky, Jim Kaufman makes another phone call, this one to stepdaughter Kim Pack.
I answer the phone and I say hello, and he's like, Kimberly? And I said yes. He's like, Mom's dead. And he just kept repeating, Mom's dead, over and over. And as I got to the front door, there was a police officer that put his hands out, and I pushed his hands away. And I go, where's my mom? Where's my mom? What is happening here? I need to see my mother. He said, we think this is a potential homicide.
No one could imagine who would have shot April Kaufman. Beautiful, blonde, glamorous, and she was fun. No one had any idea what was going on behind those closed doors.
She made everybody feel like they were her best friend. Didn't matter who they were, the checkout, the parking lot cart guy, you know, hey beautiful, hey handsome, how you doing today?
Friends Peg O'Boyle and Lee Darby knew April since she was a teenager and knew her well enough to know that her outward glow masked an inner pain.
She had a really rough childhood. When April was 11, her mother gave her brothers and sister up for adoption, and April was raised by her grandmother, and her brothers and sister were put into foster care.
You know, I think she had her thirst for being, you know, feeling loved. She just wanted to be loved.
She would discover unconditional love at 17 when she gave birth to Kim with her first husband.
She was an incredible mom. She seemed to just instinctively know what to do.
She always spoke to Kimberly like a little adult, and we used to call her Agnes, Agnes Beeswax, because she was this little old soul. April just wanted the best for her and gave her the best that she possibly could. You know, she worked hard.
April dropped out of school when she became pregnant, but she got her GED. She clawed her way back. She opened a salon, a catering business, a cafe, a charity worker.
But while April worked hard, she played hard too.
She liked motorcycles and fast cars?
She did. When she got her first motorcycle, she said, I'll give you $300 to get on the back of my motorcycle. And I was like, no way. My feet are on the ground. And she would be like, all right, $500. And I'm like, no, I'm not getting on the back of your motorcycle. Just the need for speed and wasn't afraid.
After 2 failed marriages, she meets Dr. Jim Kaufman. Friends and family say the wild child finally had found her match.
He drives a Harley, he's smoking cigars, he's a Green Beret in the military, a doctor.
In fact, this caricature sketched for Jim's 60th birthday seems to sum up the couple's life. There's April, the buxom Jersey girl, overshadowed by her larger-than-life new husband, who's prominently depicted with a gun, big cigar, and something else, military tattoos. Conditions.
There were 2 rules to this interview. 1, you can never ask my mother about this, anything pertaining to this interview. And 2, you have to destroy the tape when you're finished.
That's a little mysterious.
Yeah, but you know, I just thought out of respect, this is what he's asking. He talks about how
Motivated to mount a campaign, using her radio voice to demand quality health care for veterans.
This was such a big issue that affected our veterans and our state, our country. So I will thank my husband for a lot of the things that I've learned over the years.
April felt that veterans should be treated like rock stars.
So how did this fierce and loved advocate for casualties of war become a casualty herself? Kim has an idea and approaches investigators with a shocking declaration.
as I made my way out into the cul-de-sac, I look up in the air and there's all these news choppers flying up above. And I said, well, you can go right over there because that's the person that killed my mom.
Stay with us.
Many attended today's funeral services at Bethel Synagogue in Margate for 47-year-old April Kaufman.
Mother's Day 2012, the town of Linwood, New Jersey turns out for one of its own, complete with a cortege of veterans leading their champion, April Kaufman, to her final resting place.
The well-known local radio host, who was shot multiple times and discovered dead in her Linwood home last Thursday.
It was like a state procession for April Kaufman. No one could believe what had happened.
She just was so caring, so compassionate. She just was an inspiration to everybody.
The loss heaviest for April's daughter, Kim.
I miss her calling me nonstop all the time. I miss her laugh. I miss her smile. I miss her infinite wisdom, because she really was my rock.
After the mourning came the murmuring. Sometimes talk is cheap, even in wealthy towns.
This is a delicate question, but there were questions about whether your mom was having affairs.
You know, they had a very unhealthy relationship, the both of them. And I will just say that there were indiscretions on both sides of the fence. And I'll leave it at that.
Did it concern you that maybe somebody that she had been involved with could have killed her?
No, but I certainly provided those people's names to the police, and I allowed them to do their due diligence.
While the community is in shock and awash in rumor and innuendo, listen to this, April's final radio broadcast, where she sounds like a woman who thinks her days are numbered.
And my bottom line is, if nothing else, of my legacy of leaving, a really beautiful daughter and 2 grandchildren on this planet, I really hope to God that people, hey, I could get a flyover at my funeral now.
You listen back to that and you think, did she have a premonition? It's kind of like she was trying to tell us something, I believe.
In those early days after her mom's death, there's one thing gnawing at Kim. One person she's curiously not getting consolation from? Her stepdad, Dr. Jim Kaufman.
Dr. James Kaufman was a very well-respected and well-regarded member of this community. But to Kim, stepfather Jim was a very different person.
He was very cold to me, always kept me at an arm's length.
Literally. Just look at the pained body language in this video taken on Kim's wedding day.
1, 2, and 3. There you go.
Take a close look. He steps into the scene. He smiles one time for the camera to flash. Then he goes back to a very taciturn demeanor and steps out. No hugging, no kissing, no warmth, nothing.
You would be in the dining room, I would be talking to my mom, and he would come and turn the lights off and just walk out of the room.
He controlled her cash flow and
yes.
how much money she could spend?
Oh, yes. And sometimes even calling her, who are you with? Where are you?
And just 2 months before April's murder, it seems the bloom was officially off the rose of her nearly 10-year marriage. Kim recalling a lunch where her mother confides she's had enough.
She talked about that she really needed to start aligning herself and getting herself in a good spot to be able to leave. I think that he had made it clear to her that she wasn't going to divorce him and take half of his empire. That was his famous words.
Did you get any feeling that your mom might have been in any kind of danger?
She had made it clear over the years that he had threatened to kill her several times, but would always follow up with, he doesn't have the guts to do it.
Though Jim is not named a suspect, some might say he begins acting like one.
Within days of April's body being found, Jim hires a lawyer.
Not only a lawyer, but the lawyer, a mob lawyer.
Ed Jacobs, one of the biggest legal names in Atlantic County. He's even defended Bill Cosby in one of his sex assault accusations.
He loves defending high-profile criminal cases. His walls in his office are covered with news clips of himself.
One possible reason he's not named a suspect? He's got an airtight alibi. That's him entering a local convenience store around the same time his wife is being gunned down.
Authorities are not releasing details, but it appears that Kaufman's shooting death was not random.
I meet him in a restaurant, and he says to me, let me tell you something. I have a very good attorney, and I'd been advised to not speak to anybody about this. He's like, you might need to really start to realize that this is never going to be solved. And I said, well, I'm not going to realize that. I said, because I will never stop finding out. And I walked away, and I never spoke to him ever again.
As the months drag on, Kim says the only cold shoulder icier than Jim's is the one she's getting from then Atlantic County prosecutor Jim McClain.
I had several meetings with him, and he would just say it was active and open and not really say much more.
Did you get the impression that he was determined to get to the bottom of this?
No.
Then, on the 1-year anniversary of April's murder, many turn out for a candlelight vigil, including so many vets she made her cause. Noticeably absent, Dr. Jim Kaufman. He marks the milestone another way.
We discovered that he was getting ready to auction off all of April's belongings and hadn't given anything to Kim.
How crushing was that for you?
Beyond, because the things that I asked for that belonged to my mother were family heirlooms or possibly Disney coffee mugs.
With her mother and all those mementos lost, Kim tries to adjust to a new normal while raising her 2 young sons and holding down her job as a pharmaceutical sales rep.
Marching through every single day, waking up with another day of hopelessness while trying to keep that glimmer of hope alive is a very tricky thing to do.
Yet while life for Kim seems hopelessly on pause, for Jim Kaufman, it's full speed ahead. Just 15 months after his wife's murder, he ties the knot again.
He remarries Carol Weintraub. When did that start? Now, the version we've gotten is that they started dating after April was found murdered. Now that's some romance.
April's friends and family were devastated, and they felt like it was a slap in the face, but the people who support Jim Kaufman say, you know, he's a widow, and he's moving on with his life.
But Dr. Kaufman's next move sets off a chain of events that pushes Kim out of limbo.
He went after my mom's life insurance policy.
And your reaction?
No way. Because you know what? This was my only attempt to maybe be able to get some answers, and the truth maybe would start to come out.
Now it's Kim's turn to lawyer up. Believing Jim is the killer, she files a wrongful death suit against her stepdad to keep him from getting her mom's $600,000 life insurance policy.
I have no choice to respond and to begin to fight for what I know is right.
The most significant kind of civil lawsuit you can have is a wrongful death case.
Coming up, a daughter undaunted, and the dynamic duo attorneys she hires begin digging into the case, and what they say they uncover is shocking.
We were talking to people that were critical witnesses to us that had not spoken to the prosecutor's office.
And their chance to grill the grieving good doctor.
He was under oath in a civil deposition. They could ask him anything.
Next. Atlantic City, legendary for its slots, signature shows, and of course, this moment. But the boom and the bust of the casino industry has made America's favorite playground a hotbed for crime, corruption, and a startling number of unsolved cases. Cases like April Kaufman's, but Kim Pack and her dogged attorneys, Patrick and Andrew Darcy, drill down, determined to get answers.
Behind the scenes, Kim, with us, was nonstop digging for answers, getting proof. We were on an island, all on our own.
But the tide may be turning.
I grew up on the beaches and the boardwalk of Atlantic City, and I always say I have sand in my shoes.
Meet Damon Tyner, son of one of Atlantic City's fabled firefighters and a longtime cop.
Your dad was a bit of a legend.
Yeah, he was very well known throughout the community.
But the younger Tyner made a name for himself as a Superior Court judge.
Good to see you. How you making out? So they named a pizza for me.
I think right here.
Yep, that would be me.
And then last year,
I, Damon G. Tyner,
became the first black prosecutor in the county's history.
So help me God.
Many seeing him as the city's much-needed savior.
You're doing a good job, man.
I appreciate it.
Great job.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You doing? You all right?
No, not judge anymore.
Good to see you.
That man's cleaning up AC.
There you go.
You took a pledge when you took the office. Tell me about the pledge.
Dating back to 1970, there are about 140 unsolved homicides. I urged my executive staff to tell me which cases were most solvable. Unanimously, they all came back to me and said, the murder of April Kaufman.
But Tyner is sworn in almost 5 years after April Kaufman's murder. 5 long years.
A lot of people wondered why 5 years passed and no recognizable work had been done.
It wasn't that there were glaring mistakes. It was just an omission of effort, you might say.
We wondered about that and tried asking former prosecutor Jim McClain about the investigation. His spokesperson tells 2020 McClain has no comment.
Fortunately, Damon Tyner became prosecutor, and his team came to the conclusion that this case should be prosecuted. For the first time, someone's listening here.
Tyner agreed to meet Kim Pack and her lawyers within that first month.
What did that mean to you?
The fact that I was lucky enough for him to say, I'm going to take a second look at this. Me, my case, thank you. Like, this is all I've been asking for this entire time, is for someone to care.
It took 3 hours for Kim's lawyers to unpack all they had uncovered.
You should take a look at these records.
But no evidence as compelling or illuminating as this.
Today's July the 11th, 2014.
A 4.5-hour-long video deposition of Dr. Jim Kaufman himself, finally talking for that wrongful death lawsuit Kim has filed.
Basically, I ask the questions, you give the answers. Understood?
Yes. 4.5 hours under oath is a lot of time. It's a lot of questions.
I do. Okay. We may proceed.
That was the first time he could be compelled to talk.
There he is in the hot seat for the very first time, getting grilled on everything from his love of guns.
How many guns do you own?
Approximately 18.
To the moment he first saw his wife lying lifeless on the floor.
I ran upstairs. I looked inside and unfortunately saw April lying there. And she wasn't moving, and she had a pallor, which I've known after 30 years is obviously someone has passed away. And I ran downstairs and went out on the lawn and was hysterical and started vomiting.
Okay, do you have tissues, by the way?
I got them.
Do you need to break?
When I look at a deposition, I sometimes turn the sound down. I don't want to hear what they're saying. I want to see what they look like and what their facial expressions are. He struck me as a manipulative guy.
But there's a barrel-sized bombshell about to drop. The doctor's casual and stunning admission about a secret he's been keeping for years. Seems that time he spent in the Special Forces wasn't so special.
Have you ever served in any branch of the military?
No.
That's right, Dr. Kaufman forced to come clean about his so-called...
Did you ever tell Kim Pack you were in the military?
Yes.
Okay. Did she ever do a project for college, and part of the project was you being in the military?
Yes.
And what you went through?
Yes.
And that you carried bodies?
Yes.
And the torture that you had gone through?
Yes.
Did you ever tell anyone that you were a Green Beret?
Yes.
Who'd you tell?
I don't recall how many people I told.
So he created this background that didn't even really exist.
That is correct. Once you start examining someone who is bold enough to engage in stolen valor, you start realizing that there are other aspects to this man's life that would require us to investigate.
But in that deposition, Dr. Kaufman posits his own theories about who may have killed his wife.
Who do you think did it?
I thought it could be someone who was one of the veterans. The last choice was that it was someone in a motorcycle gang.
What motorcycle gang?
The Pagans.
The Pagan motorcycle gang? Remember, April had a penchant for motorcycles. Could that mean she was in deep with the kind of people known for violent behavior?
The pagan outlaws are the equivalent of the Hell's Angels. They are felons of the most dangerous sort.
Coming up, a stunning turn in the Kaufman case.
No, I killed myself.
Leading to a standoff in the Garden State. We're on the beat with James Scopa, lead detective determined to crack a big case for Atlantic City's new prosecutor.
I was happy when Prosecutor Tyner came in and he allowed us to work on a case and investigate it like we believed it should be.
Meanwhile, Kim and her lawyers keep their eye on what they believe is the prize, Jim Kaufman, using his pictures on social media as incentive.
I would get a picture of Jim Kaufman and Carol at the Final Four and, you know, smiling, and I'd put it on my brother's screen so that when he came in the morning, that would be the first thing he'd see is a picture of Jim Kaufman saying, yeah, so what? I killed her. What are you going to do about it?
But there's an unexpected canary in Kaufman's coal mine. It's coming in the form of a tip from the FBI. The feds believe Kaufman may be involved in another unrelated crime.
Lo and behold, another investigation related to insurance fraud, his role as a doctor, comes up.
Investigators get a warrant to search his office.
So they show up at Kaufman's clinic just to look at his records.
On June 13th, 2017, we attempted to serve a search warrant at Dr. Kaufman's office here.
Within minutes, it's clear this will not be a routine visit.
Detective Scope with the prosecutor's office under last week. Stay right here for me. Keep your names off down there. No.
What does he do instead of ushering them in as most of us would with?
There changes everything.
The husband of a murdered South Jersey radio host and advocate is behind bars following an early morning standoff.
Investigators say that same day they seized more weapons from Kaufman and at least $100,000 in cash. That was a game changer.
After the standoff with Jim Kaufman, he goes to jail, not for murder, but for weapons charges. He fights to try to get out. The judge would not let him out based on his conduct, and that gives the new prosecutor, Tyner, a chance to really dig into the murder case.
Starting with the crime scene.
So this is the house here. The bedroom that April was found was upstairs.
But the biggest break in the case doesn't come from inside this house at all.
We knew Dr. Kaufman that there was a point in time that he was inquiring about having her killed. And
how'd you find that out?
We were able to get a witness to cooperate with us this past November. That broke the case.
And who was that witness? A former member of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Remember them? They're the ones Dr. Kaufman had pointed the finger at in his deposition.
The last choice was that it was someone in a motorcycle gang.
What motorcycle gang?
The Pagans.
But now the tables have turned. One of those pagans ratting out Kaufman, and not just for murder. Prosecutor Tyner on January 9th, 2018.
Hey, Sergeant. Sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Damon G. Tyner.
At a press conference, Tyner lays out the case of an elaborate and secret double life that Dr. Jim Kaufman was leading. Treating patients by day, writing fraudulent opioid prescriptions for those pagans by night.
They would come in and be patients, and all of a sudden you had a prominent endocrinologist that was prescribing opioids and all kinds of other painkillers when that wasn't quite his practice.
So he's got the power of the prescription, and then they've got the gang activity.
Essentially, they were flooding the market with opioids and selling them at a marked up price.
What a bombshell. This straight-laced doctor that everyone had respected was part of a pill mill, a drug ring. And not only that, with the pagan outlaw motorcycle gang. And April Kaufman found out.
Found out and, according to Tyner, threatened to expose his secret seedy double life.
He started thinking about ways to engage his exit strategy.
To get rid of her.
To get rid of her. For the past 5.5 years since April Kaufman was found shot to death, there's been little movement on this case, and no arrests had been made in connection with the murder. That is until today.
An explosive breakthrough in the murder of radio host April Kaufman.
Murder charges just filed against Dr. James Kaufman in a plot that police say involved members of a motorcycle gang.
But wait a minute, didn't the doctor have an airtight alibi? Remember that early morning stop at a convenience store? Tyner says Kaufman wasn't the shooter, that he paid one of those pagans roughly $20,000 to do his dirty work and kill his wife.
He went inside and he shot April Kaufman twice.
And ironically, that alleged hitman died a year and a half after April's murder of an opiate overdose. His pills prescribed by, you guessed it, Dr. Jim Kaufman.
When I heard the details of everything, it really was unbelievable. I feel like this is the worst made-for-TV movie on the planet.
The prosecutor worries Dr. Kaufman could be targeted by pagan members in jail, so they move him upstate to the Hudson County Correctional Facility as they begin gearing up for their first major trial. Finally, a chance to close one of those Atlantic County cold cases. But then, another shocking turn.
Dr. James Kaufman dead. Officials with the Hudson County Correctional Facility confirmed that he died at 9:20 this morning.
What was your reaction when you heard this?
I was stunned.
The story started off terrible and is ending terrible.
Dr. Jim Kaufman dead. But how?
Were you worried that he could be hurt in prison?
That's always a concern.
Will justice ever be served? Stay with us. It's been a long, strange trip for Dr. Jim Kaufman, from a plush suburban cul-de-sac to the Hudson County Jail. His new home, a 6 by 9 foot cell like this.
This is unit.
This is Charlie 500 East. Maximum security.
The inmates, many considered violent and dangerous, were Dr. Kaufman's new neighbors as he awaited his trial in a facility just across the river from New York City.
What kind of crimes?
You're talking murder.
It's rare to get a look inside these tight quarters unless you're an inmate, but corrections officers agreed to take us in, recalling that fateful morning. Just after serving Dr. Kaufman breakfast, they made a grim discovery. The doctor was dead, hanging himself with a laundry cord.
I was stunned, but that's, in retrospect, that's what convinces me now more than ever that he understood that the end was near.
He realized it had all caught up with him.
Yes, I think so.
Bottom line, he had his wife murdered, and the only way out for him was suicide.
Kaufman did leave something behind in that jail cell. This note obtained by 2020.
Even in that jail cell, when he killed himself, he had to write this very lengthy suicide note to be in control at the very end, to get the last word.
Kaufman adamant that he didn't kill April.
I cannot live like this. No matter what anybody says, did not do anything to my wife.
This 6-page suicide note is bizarre.
Throughout the note, he quotes Latin, including phrases that Roman gladiators would say to the emperor before they fought in the Colosseum. Really?
His final words do add a surprisingly new angle to the sordid saga.
April came to me and said, would I like to go to a motorcycle rally to meet some of her friends? I was slightly shocked, to say the least, that they had the colors of pagans.
The most important thing that Jim Kaufman wants people to take away from this note is, I didn't kill April. She introduced me to this outlaw gang. I was prescribing pills. They then got aggressive with me. They then started threatening me. And they're the ones who killed April.
Were you able to determine whether April had any involvement with either the gang or the pill mill?
Our investigation at the time did not lead us to believe that she had any involvement. I believe that at some point she became aware of it. I think ultimately that's the reason why she was killed.
But dead men tell no tales, at least not in court. And with both that alleged hitman and Jim Kaufman deceased, Tyner's last call for justice would rest with the case against the accused pagan ringleader, who he believes conspired with Kaufman to kill April. Just weeks ago, that case unfolded in a New Jersey courtroom, Freddie Augello on trial. It took a jury less than 2 hours to find Augello guilty of all counts in connection with the murder of April Kaufman. A painful conclusion for a grieving daughter, yet a measure of solace. Kim Pack may finally find the justice she's been seeking for years.
Why do you think this case wasn't solved 6 years ago?
I don't know, that's the million-dollar question. But what I do know is that I was blessed and granted the ability to have peace in my life for the first time in 6 years by a man with determination and that believed in my story. and that is Damon Tyner, and I am forever grateful to that man.
Although in a tale as twisted and tragic as this, there's hardly any true closure.
And that's the saddest part of this entire story. Her mom's still not coming back. And when everything's quiet and it's just Kim and she's alone and she's thinking, her best friend's gone.
We were robbed, and for what? I still don't have the answer to that. For what?
When we come back, one of those precious family heirlooms sold at auction has been recovered. The secret message from beyond the grave found inside, next. Kim Pack doesn't just resemble her mom, she's inherited the same passion that made April Kaufman so beloved.
She's like a pit bull.
She is.
She latches on and she's not letting go until she gets what she's looking for.
She's a mini April.
There's been dark days, very dark days, where I just didn't know how I was going to do this. But I knew that I needed to stand up. This story needed to be told.
But in that darkness, something special. Remember when Jim sold off all of April's belongings? Turns out Lee Darby and Peg O'Boyle, dubbing themselves April's Angels, swooped in.
These women got together and they were on the phone calling people, raising money to be able to buy back things that belonged to my mother.
So that's how you got the last remnants of your mom's things?
Yes, and my mom collected these little Limoges things, and this was the first item that I touched from the auction. And inside this note, it says, "To Kimberly, from Mom. Whenever you look at this, you know you're always loved. You're so special. Best wishes for the rest of your life."
And you had no idea that note was there?
No, and I feel like this was meant to be. I feel like I was meant to have this. I keep this by my bed. It reminds me that my mom is with me all the time.
Out in the community, other reminders.
My husband and my boys got this bench dedicated for her. It's special because it's a spot that we saw. I think she would say to me now, "You can breathe. You can go on and live. You don't have to be sad anymore. And thank you for fighting."
A fighter to the finish. Remember Kim Pack's civil case to get her mother's life insurance?
Well, we can report tonight that her attorney now says that's been amicably settled with Kaufman's widow. And that is 2020 for tonight. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Amy Robach. From all of us here at ABC News in 2020, good night.
About quarter to midnight on the 18th of April, the police got a call from a woman saying that she was in Chiltwell Street in Glastonbury and that she had stabbed her lodger.
Step away, step away, step away, step away now.
When they arrived, there was a man at the bottom of the stairs. He was unconscious.
Kick on the floor, turn over.
In an adjacent room was Dawn Lewis, who also had injuries, quite hysterical at that point.
Okay, I've got colleagues with him, just calm down.
After the paramedics and the police had tried to give as much intervention as they could, it was apparent they weren't going to be able to save his life and he was pronounced dead at the scene.
The man is 61-year-old Glenn Richards, who has lived with Dawn Lewis as her lodger for the last 8 months.
I called the ambulance. I want you here, okay?
Right.
It took ages.
Okay.
Right, it's okay.
Bring your other hand to the small of your back.
Yeah, absolutely.
From the outset, on that initial phone call, she's saying, I was attacked by Glenn, she's got the injuries, and I've attacked Glenn, but I was scared. Is Dawn telling us the truth? Am I dealing with a murder or a self-defense killing?
Dawn was definitely into the hippie vibe. She was bright, bubbly, very much an extrovert. She liked to socialise.
In 2019, Dawn Lewis, aged 50, moves into her dream home, a large country cottage in Glastonbury, Somerset.
She was very well known in Glastonbury. She was described by some as a Glastonburian, which is someone who embraces the alternative lifestyle that Glastonbury is widely associated for.
Dawn had a really tight friendship group in Glastonbury, especially around the Chiltwell Street area. They're very, very friendly people that embraced anybody that joined that community, it would seem. So, yeah, it's a typical street where if you're short of a bag of sugar, you go and ask your neighbour and your neighbour will give it to you.
I don't remember when I met Dawn first, but basically you'd meet on the street, just outside, and yeah, just became friends. We had an open door policy here.
We were actually going back and forth in between houses.
Dawn is loud, bubbly, likeable, in your face, can be too much. Dawn wants to be the life and soul of the party at all things, so she's the polar opposite of Glenn.
Dawn and Glenn first met while working in a charity shop.
Dawn and Glenn had their differences, but I think they also had quite a lot in common. They were best of friends and spent a lot of time together walking the dog. Dawn helped him in everyday life, and Glenn as well is a helping person.
He was very introverted and quite the opposite to Dawn in a lot of ways. Didn't live an exciting life, wanted to live a quiet life, didn't socialise much. Some may say dull and boring, but I think that was the type of life that he wanted to lead at that time.
Dawn being very outgoing, free-spirited. Apparently she was flirtatious. She had been in same-sex relationships, but later disclosed she was bisexual. Then we look at Glenn, straight, single man, may have picked up signals which weren't there. That will be something that only those two would have known.
It always came across that they were very supportive of each other, which is the only thing you can get from a really good friendship. I think that Glenn tried to keep her on an even keel. I think he was probably quite a reasonably good influence on her.
In 2021, Dawn invites Glenn to move in with her as her tenant.
I personally think that the only reason he moved in is because he thought he was helping her out, and as he's been doing throughout the years that they've known one another.
I can only assume that he gave up a secure tenancy to help her, because it was cash in her pocket. I could understand the benefits Dawn got from it, but I never understood the benefits that Glenn got from it.
Dawn owned the house. She had purchased that house with a previous partner, and she had taken that house on herself. Quite a big house for one person and a dog, so at some point in the past she split the upper level into a separate part of accommodation with locked doors to her part of the premises, and any lodgers would have their own part of the premises. There were separate living rooms, separate bathrooms, separate bedrooms. Glenn found it more difficult to make friends, quite solitary at times, but Dawn, through their friendship, introduced him to other people as well, so he could build himself a life in Glastonbury.
All we knew about Glenn really is what Dawn told us. It was very hard to get any sort of conversation from him. And trust me, I tried, really tried. He was just very, very pleasant. You just couldn't get to know him.
Glenn would answer your questions. Yes would be the answer, but then he wouldn't elaborate on it anymore. He was always seemed to be pretty subdued.
Dawn would always invite him in. Oh, can I bring Glenn? I don't want to leave him on his own. So I was never sure whether Glenn actually wanted to go to these things. He would follow her like a puppy half the time. It's literally Dawn, Glenn.
For somebody like Glenn, who might want a new start in life, he might find value in somebody like Dawn, who has confidence, who will take risks on his behalf to help him come out of his shell. And conversely, somebody like Dawn, he can help her be a bit more introspective and a bit more down to earth. but at the same time it's about how they respect each other's differences and personalities.
But within just a few months, Glenn's reclusive nature takes its toll on the friendship.
It feels like Glenn is getting on a bit. He's getting older. He wants to move away from that lifestyle, whereas Dawn seems to be very much trapped in that space. And I think over time that's causing a rift between them, it's causing irritation. You know, Dawn is irritated that Glenn's not her partner in crime as he used to be. Glenn's irritated about the noise and the constant disturbances. So you can see how trouble might be brewing.
After being friends for over a decade, Glenn moved into Dawn's country cottage in Glastonbury towards the end of 2021, and I think that's when their relationship really started to deteriorate.
It's quite unusual to find close platonic relationships, so it's very possible that they might have overestimated their connection and they might have initially overvalued their relationship. And of course, when they were in each other's space and living together, little issues can lead to arguments, and over time can become quite problematic.
Dawn Lewis did use Glenn to her advantage when she wanted some work doing, gardening, the rubbish taken out, the dog walking. She would look to Glenn to assist her with that. There was occasions where she banned him from using the shower except for one day a week, banned him from using the washing machine except for a particular day.
So in every coercive controlling relationship there are rules and regulations because that person is holding the power, and if you breach the rules and regulations there will be a consequence in some way, shape or form. And this is quite clear that Dawn was taking full advantage of that power and control over Glenn, who was at that point in a vulnerable situation. He's become submissive to her, so to speak, you know, because it was her property.
With the friendship under such strain, Dawn loses Glenn as the stabilising influence on her life.
It seemed to me that Dawn was going downhill. She seemed to be forever drinking, and she was getting more out of control.
Patricia was still a little more acceptant of her. I became a little more weary because of some of the things she would do. Kind of catch her in those porcupines that she would tell, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, she told you one thing and then told me something else, and I started backing away, going, not interested in that type of friendship anymore.
You could see she was getting agitated, and you think, that's over and above normal behaviour. George and I have seen Dawn flip on a switch. It made you see her in a new light at one point. She flipped at George and got right up in his face, and I thought, where did that come from? And kind of from then onwards, you're very wary of someone that does that, behaves aggressively and that, just switches.
If you came between Dawn and her obsession, I don't think my front door would have slowed her down. I had seen her get to the point of anger that even I got scared.
And what we saw was
scary.
Now, of course, this could have just been a one-off incident where she lost her temper in an extreme situation, but it could potentially indicate a pattern. So maybe Dawn isn't everything that meets the eye. Maybe she's actually more violent and potentially aggressive than she likes to portray herself.
By March 2022, Dawn wants to move on.
I think basically Glenn may have been an inconvenience. She got bored. She got bored with it.
She was wanting to move him out so she could bring someone else in. Someone that may have fit her scenario in her head, that she needed to do what she needed to do.
She got a sight set on something else.
Whilst Glenn was living in the house as a lodger, Dawn would have a lot of friends, very much an open door sort of policy, like it was in many houses in that street.
One friend, who is well known amongst the neighbours, starts to spend more and more time at Dawn's cottage.
our friend would come down here to party, so we'd all be at the party group. And Dawn was part of that. Because of Dawn's behaviour, our group had become more fractured to a level that I didn't want to even cross her in the street. So when our friend did come down, it was a case of we'd be here and he would then go to see the other group members on his own.
She paraded him up and down the high street going, "Oh, my new boyfriend."
It is what she called him. I think she was putting a stamp on him.
Dawn announces there is a new man in her life, and she lets it be known that Glenn's days at the cottage are numbered.
I know for a fact, because he told me, that she'd asked him to move in, that she was getting rid of Glenn and wanted him to move in.
But Glenn definitely didn't want to leave because he was trying to get his life where he wanted it to go.
I think maybe even possibly he thought, I made a mistake. She was supposed to be my friend. She told me that this would work.
Now frozen out of Dawn's life, Glenn has nobody else to turn to and nowhere else to go.
Dawn wanted him out. She made that perfectly clear. Glenn wanted to stay and he refused to leave. Glenn would regularly complain about the noise that Dawn was making, whether that was just her general brashness, her general loudness, throwing parties, socialising. I think it was just the world that she lived that Glenn wasn't a part of. In one text, Glenn described Dawn as a grade 1 narcissist. He would also regularly tell her that he wasn't a threat, but he wasn't moving out and he wasn't going anywhere.
Easter bank holiday weekend. The once supportive friendship hits rock bottom.
Dawn's back garden was very long, 100-odd feet up towards Glastonbury Tor, and towards the top of that garden was a teepee that she used to use to entertain guests. Glenn's bedroom at the top of the house did overlook the back garden. You could hear what was going on at the top of the garden from Glenn's bedroom.
I remember one evening, our friend was going there, and there was a noise. Even I could hear the noise.
We do know that Glenn sent Dawn a message asking them respectively to be a bit quiet because it was disturbing him, and he also interpreted the noise they were making as a sexual act. And the conversation he had with Dawn was that she was being disrespectful to him, making that sort of noise in the garden underneath his bedroom window. I'm pretty confident in saying that that probably instilled a little bit of rage in him.
When we look at Glenn and with Dawn, he might have just been jealous of her, even just friendships with anybody else, let alone if there was anything intimate between them, which we will never know. Glenn wasn't needed as much as he was before. He wasn't that calming influence now. Now Dawn has got somebody else.
The following evening, Dawn turns to a female friend, claiming what is truly happening behind closed doors.
Dawn had texted her to say she was really worried about Glenn. I'm scared of Glenn. He's really scaring me. I've got my doors locked. Then my dog is behaving in a strange way, and Glenn's pacing around like a caged animal.
Dawn said that she'd become increasingly concerned about Glenn's, she described it as erratic and obsessive behaviour. She described where Glenn was caught wearing her underwear. Dawn claims that Glenn deliberately walked in on her while she was having sex.
We do know that Dawn actually said to Glenn, to stop watching me shower. Why was Glenn watching her have a shower? Was the door left open to the bathroom for him to sort of look at her having a shower? Or did he sort of impose himself and push the door open to watch her having a shower? So obviously there's lots of mixed signals going on with the relationship. This is just an explosion waiting to happen.
These are things that Dawn was saying was happening within the privacy of her own home. By all accounts, there was no boundaries in terms of Glenn's mind, and Dawn had got to the stage where she was actually telling people she'd become frightened of him. I think anyone who heard her tell that story would have shared her concern, and that was one of the reasons she says she wanted him out of her cottage.
But Dawn says despite all this, Glenn is still stubbornly refusing to leave.
He was adamant that, no, I'm not going anywhere. I haven't done anything wrong. There's no reason that you can just simply kick me out. And that frustrated her more because there was no way that she could just say, get out, you have to leave. Because he was there, he was paying the rent.
When we dig a bit deeper into exactly what the tensions were between Dawn and Glenn, we have Dawn's perspective, and she claims that he was committing some pretty odd and creepy behaviour, and there might have been, to her, some red flags of potential sexually predatory behaviour. From Glenn's perspective, he perhaps felt that she was leading him on to a degree, so harbouring this kind of resentment over time is very dangerous.
Is the patient breathing? Hello, hello. Hello, is the patient breathing?
No, I don't know. I haven't touched him. He's a lodger. I wanted him out. He stabbed me in the leg. I took the knife off him. I stabbed him.
David's close, back close.
The first people that get there, it's that situation you never want to experience as a police officer. Then emotions will start, by their very nature, running wild. Those police officers attending that night will go into professional mode, I need to save this man's life.
Right, move back. Officer the taser, step away, step away now, step away.
Glenn was at the bottom of the stairs, on the floor, he was unconscious.
Move backwards. Get on the floor, turn over. Right, put your hands out. Do not make any sudden movements, do you understand? We're doing it now.
They set about giving him the best first aid they can. Dawn Lewis, who also had injuries and quite hysterical at that point.
Stay on the floor.
Right, that's fine, but check him. I'm wounded, but I'm not dead.
Okay, I've got colleagues with him, just calm down.
Okay.
Don't make any sudden movements.
Okay, just sort him out.
Alright, stay still.
Okay, so good.
It was bloody, it was frantic. Dawn was laying on the floor, and she was actually screaming. And the fact that she referred to him as a friend showed that there was still maybe a feeling of affection there.
We've got one male, has been confirmed, stabbed, he's unconscious.
The officers that initially attended were seen clearly to be treating stab wounds on his torso. It became quite clear that Glenn was in a critical condition and they wanted to give life-saving treatment there and then. So Glenn was taken out onto the street and treated on the pavement outside. This person is in their potentially in their last gasps of life, and whether they live or die is somewhat dependent on what you do at that stage. Also, dealing with the suspect still in the premises, injuries to her as well. There's so much going through these officers' minds.
Right, listen, I'm going to approach you, okay? Don't make any sudden movements.
No, love, I'm not. I called the ambulance and want you here, okay?
Right.
Right, it's okay.
Bring your other hand to the small of your back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, at this moment in time, you're under arrest for GBH with intent. You don't have to say anything, but the main defence, if you do not mention one question, something which later on in court, anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand?
Despite the emergency service's best efforts, Glenn Richards is pronounced dead at the scene.
My job is to come in the next day and go to be briefed on the case, what we knew so far, and what needed doing afterwards. Ultimately, though, in my role, I want to understand exactly what's happened within that scene as early as possible, to see how we can best interpret that scene to either disprove or prove that the victim was murdered, how, with what, and by who.
Officers waste no time and cordon off her home as a crime scene.
They had literally shut off the street in front of our house. You immediately go, what the heck's going on? You go out and the police are going, no, get back in your house, you can't come out.
It was just police walking up and down the road, and we didn't have a clue what had happened.
It's something you would not expect. No, you never expect something like that.
When we first arrived as the police, we tried to interpret as best as we can. What was quite apparent right from the start was that where Glenn was lying when we found him was potentially not the place that he was attacked. We found a number of knives. The first knife that we found was indicated by Dawn that that is the knife that Glenn used to attack her, and then she subsequently used to attack Glenn. In one of the living rooms on a shelf, we found a knife very similar in description to what we believe to be the murder weapon, and also in Dawn's bedroom we found a further knife as well.
The knives are sent off to forensics for analysis, while Mead attempts to make sense of the scene inside Dawn's cottage.
All we know is that she says she stabbed her lodger because he attacked her. What I can say at that stage is that there was a particular area in his bedroom which would indicate there had been an attack in there. There was also quite clear evidence that somebody with a bloodletting injury had come down the stairs at some point, whether that's fallen, walked. And then we also know that there was pooling of blood at the bottom of the stairs, which was consistent with where Glenn was found when we first arrived. All I'm left with at that stage is almost a blank canvas of me then having to piece together what's happened from using her initial call.
Is the patient breathing? Hello, hello. Hello, is the patient breathing?
No, I don't know. I haven't touched him.
Clearly Dawn is upset, but she's still compos mentis. She's still able to have a normal conversation and answer questions. I'm intrigued about the veracity of her appearing to be upset and distraught.
Just tell me exactly what's happened.
Right, I don't know really what happened. He's a lodger, I wanted him out. Yeah. I said no. I went to the door, he stabbed me in the leg.
It's quite shocking how sort of calm she is, you know, the initial hello, hello. If you stab somebody, you would be hysterical on the phone.
I took the knife off him, I stabbed him, he fell down the stairs, I stabbed him again because he was trying to take the knife off me.
Dawn was claiming self-defence. She claimed she thought that her life was in danger. If Dawn's story was true, then it's an incredibly scary experience.
She's going into a lot of detail about what's happened. Certainly tells us that she stabbed him a number of times. But I just have the opinion is all about Dawn Lewis. It's all about, you know, I'm fine, don't worry about me, worry about Glenn, you know, I've done this horrible thing to him because he was horrible to me, but let's all worry about him now. Just the underlying thing to me is it's about self-preservation.
I've called you and you just know about his breathing.
Does she come across as believable? You know, you listen to that call, is that somebody that's in shock or is that someone who's genuinely upset? I don't know. We have 24 hours initially to interview Dawn. Obviously I want her treated for her injuries first and make sure she's comfortable so I can get the best opportunities to get the best interview I can out of Dawn Lewis. To find out exactly, in her opinion, what's gone on within that house.
Dawn is ready to be questioned in custody.
She was interviewed 7 times over the next 2 days, and throughout those interviews she answered no comment to all the questions we asked her. She's not denying in her initial calls that she stabbed Glenn. What she's saying is, I stabbed him in retaliation to him stabbing me, or in self-defence, to protect herself. Is Dawn telling us the truth?
Neil Mead has just 24 hours with Dawn in custody before he must either charge or release her. He turns to Glenn's past and makes a shocking discovery.
I found out that Glenn had a previous conviction himself. Back in the early 2000s, Glenn had been convicted of killing his wife.
Glenn's horrific past conviction changes the entire focus of the investigation. Police immediately delve deeper into his past.
Glenn was an ex-sergeant in the Metropolitan Police. He got married in 1992, but by 1998 their relationship and their marriage had completely fallen apart. Glenn had suspected his wife of having an affair, and his jealousy turned into rage and hatred.
We know he was released from duties due to mental health. It probably would have been intense. If I can't have and nobody else will. A restraining order was put in place, And for him to breach it as well, he's showing that he doesn't care about authority, that, you know, he's going to do everything he can to get her back.
Glenn had become obsessed and wasn't willing to let her go. He was described at the time as being a control freak, very jealous, and someone his wife feared so much she had a panic alarm fitted at her home that caught the devastating attack on camera.
Glenn hangs outside the family house. His wife takes their children bowling, and after she returns, he knocked on the door. When she answered, he stabbed her 4 times in the chest and he killed her in front of his own 2 sons.
We can see that he was a perpetrator of abuse and coercive controlling behaviour, and he did the ultimate.
Glenn appears in front of a judge at the Old Bailey in March 2002.
Glenn ended up getting a comparatively light sentence, so instead of a charge of murder, he got diminished responsibility, which downgraded it to manslaughter. And that would have been in the context of his mental health issues. This is the kind of case that I give evidence for regularly as an expert witness and forensic psychiatrist. So what it would have meant is, at the time, he and his defence team would have proved that Glenn had a mental illness which affected his ability to understand his own conduct, or to form a rational judgment, or to exhibit self-control. In terms of the impact that the murder that Glenn committed would have had on his children, I mean, it would be utterly devastating. They would have to mourn 2 parents, their mother who was killed, and also their father who would then go to prison for many, many years.
In 2011, Glenn was released from prison on life licence and probation, supposedly rehabilitated, obviously trying to keep his head down and just sort of integrate in society.
Is that conviction relevant to this investigation? Obviously it's relevant. He's killed somebody in a domestic circumstance before with a knife. Is Dawn telling us the truth? She's living with a proven violent man that's previously taken her life. Does that add more credence to her story that she was defending herself? Or was she using that as a lever to, again, get people to believe that what she does was in response to him attacking her and her being scared?
Well, to be honest, with Glenn, none of us knew about his history. All we knew about Glenn really is what Dawn told us. It was very hard to think that he would have done that.
Neighbours discover why Glenn was so desperate to stay at Dawn's cottage.
He had the plan in his head that he wanted to meet up with his son. He was striving very hard to accomplish that. So in order not to go back to prison for what he had done, he was doing what was ever required of him to stay out of trouble.
There was a plan for Glenn to meet his sons, and part of the probation, the conditions, was a fixed abode. So he needed to stay at Dawn's place to show he was trying to move forward with his life. And Dawn knew that. She almost used it as a tool of manipulation, knowing that she could push the boundaries a little bit, and it would be very hard for him to try and move out.
To me, this is really a unique case. You know, you've got somebody who was a perpetrator of abuse to all of a sudden become the victim of somebody who's more controlling than you. But he still would have had that element of abuse and control and coercion because he was a perpetrator. But he's got to suppress that for his future.
There's no dispute that he was stabbed by Dawn. The dispute is the reason why Dawn stabbed him.
Faced with 2 aggressive individuals and no witnesses, Neil Mead needs a breakthrough.
Dawn had 3 stab wounds to her right thigh. Very linear. We had a comment made by a doctor in A&E saying these injuries are self-inflicted. That obviously pricked my ears up when I was told that. If you get stabbed once, however deep it is, you're going to move because it hurts. So to stand there while she stabbed 3 times in the leg and not move because these injuries are literally in a line down her leg, again, sort of increased my suspicion that they may well be self-inflicted.
This is an incredibly hard thing to do psychologically, because you want to make the wound deep enough for it to look credible, but at the same time, it's going to be petrifying. You're going to want to minimize the amount of pain and the amount of injury and disability.
That's so unusual for me. I've never experienced it before. It made a real strong suggestion to me that there may be more to this case than initially seen.
Neil Mead returns to the crime scene and considers the layout of Dawn's historic country cottage.
There had been an assault that led to a bloodletting injury in the corner of his bedroom. So my view was at that stage, why would she then go into his bedroom? You know, you're scared of somebody, why go into their domain essentially? Why go into the lion's cage if you're scared of them? So for me as a senior investigator, I'm saying at that stage, there's nothing more I can do with Dawn in custody. This is as far as I can take this. I'm going to go to the CPS and ask if I can charge.
Dawn Lewis is charged with the murder of Glenn Richards.
It was shortly after that when our friend made a panic knock at the door.
The man who Dawn described as her boyfriend has unexpectedly arrived at Chilkwell Street.
He looked terrible, absolutely awful. He was in shock. You just knew something was wrong, so we brought him in and we just went, "What's wrong?" He said, "I think I've missed something out, and I think it might be."
Leading the investigation, I'm keen to know what he's got to say.
The man Dawn Lewis sometimes described as her boyfriend gives a statement to the police.
Earlier in the evening, he's had a video phone call from Dawn. And during that video call, he says that she's obviously upset with the situation with Glenn, but then goes to tell us that on that video call, Dawn is waving a knife around, and she says, "What should I do? Should I just stab him and then stab myself and make out that he attacked me?" And Dawn turns and shows him right at the top of her thigh. From where he indicates she was going to stab herself is exactly where Dawn stabbed herself, literally hours before she killed him.
I'm going to stab him and then I'm going to stab myself. And what happened? That was within hours of it happening. So was she scared of him, of Glenn? No, she bloody well wasn't.
The police hand over the new incriminating evidence to the CPS, and the murder trial of Dawn Lewis begins at Bristol Crown Court.
At the start of any murder trial, there's quite a lot of anticipation. The courtroom reflected the community. There were supporters for both Glenn and for Dawn. But if Dawn was able to prove that she did act in self-defence and the jury believed her story, then she would walk free from court at the end of the trial.
Dawn pleads not guilty to murder.
Through this case, what was always in my mind was, I have got a man that he's got a violent past and had previously taken somebody else's life in really horrific circumstances. So right through this trial, it was always on the balance.
The prosecution opening began by playing a 999 call.
He's a lodger, I wanted him out. He stabbed me in the leg, I took the knife off him, I stabbed him again.
It began by playing the police body-worn footage, which shows Dawn being arrested.
Move backwards, move backwards. Get on the floor, turn over, turn over.
It really tried to paint a picture and bring to life the horror of what had happened in that home in Glastonbury into the courtroom.
The prosecution called George and Patricia to the witness box.
It was stress, stress, stress. I didn't want to be there, but you have to do your thing. You have to say it as it is, which is hopefully what I did.
You looking at Dawn sitting in the dock, and you don't want to be the person to say something that puts it over the edge, but I have to be honest.
You didn't know whether it was going to stick, or whether she was going to get off, or how long it was going to be. Are you free, or are you then at risk? That was my fear.
Next to give evidence is the Home Office pathologist who conducted Glenn's post-mortem.
Glenn sustained 5 stab wounds to the torso, and at least one of those would have been fatal. Also, there were some wounds to his hands, suggest that he may well have put up a fight against the knife. At this stage, Dawn's story could be true. The injuries to Glenn could be caused in a way that Dawn...
Fantasising about how he would have carried out the killing of his former wife differently. She said at one stage, I was terrified that he was just going to jump out and kill me, and claimed to be living with that constant fear. Really trying to paint a picture that she was terrified that she was going to die in the attack, and really playing on the emotions and the fears that generated. What she didn't count upon is her friend coming forward. As a journalist, you try to go into things with an open mind. You're not there to judge yourself, you're there to report on the facts and the evidence as it's been presented to court. But there are some moments in trials, clearly, when it has an impact.
The man Dawn used to describe as her boyfriend takes the stand.
The poor guy spent 2 full days in the witness box. That is stress. I mean, he was just coming down here for a relaxing day with the buddies, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of a murder trial.
He details their video call for the jury.
It was not just the fact that he'd outlined the murderous intent of Dawn that day, but it was the level of detail and description in which Dawn had described the attack that she planned to him, including physically mimicking a stabbing motion and how she would then claim self-defence. That for me was such compelling evidence that I feel really Dawn struggled to come back from.
Dawn probably thought by telling her friend what she was going to do that they weren't going to disclose her plans to the police, but to have that self-assurance speaks volumes of what Dawn was as a person. She's got such power and control over Glenn that perhaps she thought this was spilling into the friendship with this new person she was friendly with.
After the closing statements, the jury retire.
Ultimately, it came down to, did they believe what the friend was saying? If they believed what he was saying, they couldn't do anything but convict. I genuinely didn't know what the jury were going to find.
The concern was that when we came home, she'd be in her house, knowing that we had sat on the stand going, this is what we heard, this is what we seen. She may have animosity towards us, and the next thing you know, you're the next target. So, yeah, it was fearful because we didn't know whether or not it was going to be safe to come back to your own home.
The jury deliberate for 9 hours. They come back 11-1 guilty for murder. The judge accepts a majority verdict, and Dawn Lewis is sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years.
One of the most moving parts of the whole proceedings for me was listening to Glenn's son's victim impact statement. He witnessed Glenn kill his mother as an 11-year-old child and hadn't seen Glenn since that fateful day. But it also transpired that just 2 weeks after Glenn died, he was due to meet Glenn for the first time through a restorative justice programme, where he was finally able to speak to Glenn and try to bring a small amount of closure for what happened 20 years previously. Dawn cheated him of the chance to confront Glenn about what had happened, and for that you can't feel anything but complete and utter disgust.
She's been exposed as a very manipulative person that was quite happy to kill somebody else to get to her own means. She wanted Glenn moved out of the house. There was an easy solution to it. One phone call to probation and they would have moved Glenn out of that premises. But she chose to concoct a story where she could kill Glenn.
In my eyes, Dawn's a typical perpetrator of abuse. She's reeled, basically, a vulnerable person in, regardless of what he's done prior to that. As a convicted killer, with his past history as well, he would have been controlling and jealous. But I do believe this instant that Dawn was the more controlling and dominant person in this relationship, and he had to be submissive and vulnerable because he had one goal ahead of him, and that was to build some sort of relationship with his sons.
Dawn will be in prison until at least 2042, but the shadow of her crimes still hangs heavy on the once happy neighborhood where she lived.
This is my home forever. It absolutely disrupted the street here. There were great friendships down here, but now everybody's got kind of secluded now. It put fear into a lot of people where there was no fear before.
From someone that you thought was your friend, I think that she honestly believed that she was
a self-made couple making plans for the next stage of their lives.
They were getting ready to have a quiet retirement.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back.
They had a lot of friends and loved spending time with family.
Gunned down, execution style, in their own home.
It just seemed to make no sense. Who would do that, and what could possibly be the motive?
While searching for the killer, investigators uncover a world of greed and deceit.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money.
He felt he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb.
People were saying that he was very upset. It's certainly his motive.
A series of chilling discoveries.
We learned that he was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Everything he's told us is a lie.
Points to a killer no one ever imagined.
People were shocked.
It shows what a messed up psyche he's got.
It was unbelievable how somebody can be that cold-blooded.
Outskirts of La Crosse, Wisconsin, lies the prestigious neighborhood of Berry Mills. In early spring of 2010, this quiet community is rocked by a disturbing 911 call.
911, what is the address to the emergency? Okay, what's going on?
I'm at my mom and dad's house. I came out to check on the
Your dad is what?
He's on the floor.
Where's your mom?
My mom is by the computer.
Is your mom breathing?
No.
Okay, and your dad is not breathing?
No.
Okay, all right.
Police race to the scene. First responding officers lead 40-year-old Eric Cola away from his deceased parents' home, while detectives head inside.
We could see that there was a male lying on the kitchen floor. There was a large pool of blood around his head.
The blood was coagulated, so it had been there a while. You know, it wasn't fresh blood.
He was holding his car keys in one hand. He had his coat on, so it was clear that he had just walked in the door. He hadn't even said everything on the counter yet. As I viewed the male victim, the wounds appeared to be a gunshot. It was near the temple of his head.
Around the corner is like a hallway entryway with a computer desk, and the female victim was there. She was shot in the head also.
Their hands are on the keyboard, and so you could see that she had been typing before she was shot. What she was typing didn't appear to be significant, but it made us believe that she had no idea that someone was behind her going to shoot her. It appeared that they ambushed them.
The victims are identified as 68-year-old Dennis Cola and his wife, 65-year-old Myrna. As investigators examine the scene, they make note of other telling details.
We didn't know if it was a single killer or more than one person, but you would expect more disturbance if there were more than one, or that they would have overpowered the victims, and that didn't seem to have happened.
With Myrna sitting at the computer comfortably, it led us to wonder if she was the first to be killed. And her husband, Dennis, came home, and he was the second one shot. There was the smell of decomposition. At that point, we weren't sure how many days earlier they were killed, but we needed to get information pretty quickly.
Detectives find no sign of forced entry and no indication of any kind of struggle.
The crime lab comes in. They collect fingerprints and DNA and a computer for analysis. We went upstairs and we noticed in the one bedroom there was a dresser that was disturbed, and it appeared that it had been ransacked. What was unusual about it was the person started at the top and worked their way down with the chest of drawers. But if you did it that way, you wouldn't be able to see what was in the drawer below it.
This looked like someone was trying to make it look like a burglary, but nothing seemed to be missing.
And there were many other valuables in the house, including Myrna's purse, and Dennis' wallet was still in his back pocket. It looked like this was staged, quite frankly.
While investigators continue searching for clues, they find what could be a key piece of evidence.
The bedroom had a .22 rifle in the closet. There's also a box of .22 shells on a shelf that had been moved and partially opened.
That was very possibly the gun that was used in the homicides.
So the gun is sent to the crime lab for an analysis.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of the murders spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
When I heard about it, I thought, I can't believe this is happening. I was devastated. It hit me real hard. It was like, why would somebody kill them? Everybody loved them.
Born and raised in Wisconsin, Dennis and Myrna Cola had been happily married for 42 years.
Dennis and Myrna had a lot of friends. They had deep roots here.
They had children and grandchildren, and they were very popular.
I didn't hear of anyone that had anything bad to say about either one of them.
From humble beginnings, Dennis rose to become a successful businessman.
Dennis had graduated as a pharmacist, and he had owned a number of pharmacies and businesses throughout the years in different locations.
I worked with him for 2 years. As a boss, he was down to earth, fantastic guy. If you needed something, he was there. He treated me like a daughter.
Dennis was successful in life and in love.
Him and his wife, they were always happy, having a good time. Myrna had a lot of energy. She was very sociable.
Myrna was very well educated, and she was presently teaching part-time substitute basis.
They had a good marriage. They enjoyed life.
The couple had 2 children, their son Eric and 37-year-old daughter Cindy. Both were married with families of their own.
Their family seemed pretty tight. Dennis and Myrna, they were involved with their kids and involved with their grandkids.
These were parents who were very dedicated. They really wanted the best for their kids and loved spending time with family. Dennis and Myrna were getting ready to have a quiet retirement and relaxing and enjoying life.
Now, those dreams have been brutally snatched away.
Both shot. I would have never in my life expected something like this to happen.
It just seemed to make no sense. We're trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
While police bring the Cola's son Eric into the station to get more information, investigators go door to door looking for witnesses.
We start canvassing to see if anyone saw anything, heard anything.
Nobody in the neighborhood had seen anything suspicious.
For them, it was just mostly shock. They couldn't believe that these 2 people had been killed.
As detectives continue to search for a lead, they get their first break.
One of the neighbors mentioned that he thought he knew the motive and why it happened, and also the murder.
He was very concerned. He believed that his life was in danger. He felt that he may be next.
This neighbor, Steve Burgess, was a banker, and he thought that he may have been the intended target of the homicide. His reasoning was he had got a threatening call multiple times, from a person that threatened to kill him.
Coming up, new evidence emerges.
The day after the homicides, he cashed his $50,000 check and never told us.
And family secrets come to light.
There was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the two.
Dennis always complained that he was worthless and that he didn't want to work.
She had apparently lit into Dennis in a rage.
Until a disturbing clue reveals a twisted plan.
Someone had put this threatening note in his mailbox.
Now he believes that someone was out to get him.
And exposes a cold-blooded betrayal nobody saw coming.
I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
It was extremely unexpected.
It's just chilling.
Have been brutally executed in their own home. Now, one of their neighbors, banker Steve Burgess, tells investigators the killer could be coming after him.
He was very concerned, and he believed that someone was out to get him, and he didn't know who, but the homicides may have been intended for him and his family.
Detectives ask Steve why someone would want him dead.
So at that time, the market crashed. There was people with money issues.
A lot of people came to him at the bank for loans, but they had no collateral, so people were very angry that Steve would not give them loans. The last threat was a couple of days earlier. It was a threat of violence. It certainly had to be taken serious.
If Steve was the intended target, how did Dennis and Myrna end up gunned down instead?
What he explained was a Google Earth search in front of Burgess's house showed the wrong address, showed Dennis and Myrna's address instead of his, and he thought that the killer killed the wrong people.
He felt that somebody had come to his house to follow through on the threat, but they ended up at Dennis and Myrna's residence. It was a concern that this possibly could have been a mistake on behalf of the murderer, and the homicides were not intended for Dennis and Myrna.
Before investigators can pursue the lead, the autopsy results arrive.
The autopsy report determined that they were both shot with a .22 caliber rifle.
But it was inconclusive. There wasn't enough bullet fragment left to tell if it came from the gun that we found in the house. No fingerprints were found. I mean, even from the victims, like the gun had been cleaned up.
The autopsy report also confirmed that they had been deceased for a few days before the 911 call. It was likely that they were killed on that Friday.
The time of death sheds new light on the threatening phone call made to neighbor Steve Burgess.
We saw that call had come in Sunday morning after the Coolas were murdered. So the timeline it didn't make any sense.
We were able to determine that the threats against Steve Burgess had nothing to do with the deaths of Dennis and Myrna.
With their first lead a bust, detectives turn their attention closer to home.
We knew Eric and his sister Cindy were very close to their parents.
Eric did day trading and stuff like that, work on stocks. He was doing well. Dennis and Eric were pretty close. Some people would say like bread and butter. They'd have get-togethers all the time.
Eric was the one that found the bodies. We needed a conversation with Eric for information that he might be able to provide us.
Hoping he can provide details about the crime, investigators interview Eric at the station.
Eric was still extremely emotional over the death of his parents, but he said he wanted to be as helpful as he possibly could and would do whatever he could to try to find who was responsible.
Detectives ask how he came to find his parents had been killed.
He said the school called and said that Myrna hadn't shown up for work. They called his parents and they didn't respond.
So Eric tried calling and was unable to get an answer, so he called his sister and asked if she had any contact with them, and she had not.
He became concerned and drove over to the house.
Once he walked in the house, he observed his father lying on the kitchen floor and started searching for his mom, and then also found her deceased.
Eric said he was extremely close to his parents. His dad, supported all of his endeavors. They were just the best of buddies.
We asked Eric what was the last time he had seen his parents, and he said a few days before the homicides.
He visited them like he did all the time. He said his dad was working on the deck, and his mom was doing laundry. There didn't seem to be anything unusual.
Investigators asked Eric where he was on the day of the murders.
He said that Friday was he and his wife's anniversary. He had worked till 2. Then he helped his buddy Mike do some work in a bathroom. They were renovating a bathroom. Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house, looking for a specific plant that his wife liked, a hanging plant.
Eric presents a receipt stamped at 6:15 p.m.
After he bought the plant, he went directly home, and they got ready to go out for the evening with friends to celebrate the anniversary. Eric said that he had tried over the weekend to contact his parents and wasn't able to do so. He was becoming concerned, but just thought that they were busy.
When asked who might have wanted to harm his parents, Eric says they were well-liked and had no enemies.
It seemed really strange, really unusual. No reason for the victims to be killed. Both victims killed.
Before concluding Eric's interview, detectives get results back from the crime lab.
The report came back indicating that the time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Myrna was using the computer, and the last keystroke was 5:41 p.m. So that gave us a timestamp. That's huge.
With the keystroke data, detectives verify Eric's alibi.
We spoke to his friend Mike, and Mike said yes, Eric was here until about 5:30 when he left, and he was going to go to the store. So he basically confirmed what Eric was telling us was correct. The receipt, combined with what his friend Mike said, it appeared that there wasn't enough time for Eric to commit the crime. Also, it just seemed very unlikely that someone who loved his mother and father very much could be involved in something like this.
Before Eric leaves the police station, he remembers crucial information that takes detectives by surprise.
Eric had told us that his sister Cindy and her husband Pat were being financially supported by Dennis and Myrna, and that their dad, Dennis, told Cindy they were getting cut off financially.
The Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy had called Dennis. Dennis let her know that there was not going to be any more money. She became very upset.
Had there been an argument over money leading Cindy to kill?
That's extremely unexpected, but she did have motive, so you start looking at Cindy as a suspect.
Believe their daughter Cindy may have been angry with her father after he cut off financial support. The two had a tense conversation just hours before the murders.
When we started talking to the circle of friends and family, we were told Dennis was more than generous. He gave tens of thousands to Cindy and her husband.
Cindy relied on her parents. They needed this money to pay their bills. When Dennis had told Cindy that he was cutting her off, she didn't know how those bills were going to get paid.
Detectives learn the Colas children are set to inherit over $700,000 from their parents' death. While son Eric is known in the community as a successful businessman, Cindy's circumstances are different.
Cindy didn't have much money, if any, and she was constantly asking for money because they were not making ends meet.
She was working a minimum wage job or a little above that, and Pat, her husband, couldn't keep a job, would quit or get fired. They were living paycheck to paycheck and Dennis's handout to handout.
Me and Dennis would talk about Cindy at the pharmacy, and he kept telling me that he was sick and tired of supporting her every month, helping them out with their bills and stuff like that. And that Friday morning, he was very upset, and he said, "My daughter called me this morning, crying on the phone because I told my daughter that I'm cutting her and her husband off."
When she would get upset, she would get just extreme, over-the-top emotions. Cindy hearing that the cash cow was being butchered would be a reason for her to now go off the rails, and it went from bad to worse.
Cindy became a strong suspect.
Police bring Cindy into the station for questioning.
Cindy appeared broke up over the deaths of her parents, but she really laid out the family dynamic. Her parents had considered her the black sheep of the family. She said that she didn't believe her parents cared about her like they cared about Eric, and she was upset with how they treated her.
She told us, according to her parents, that Eric could do no wrong and that Cindy was a disappointment and continued to be a disappointment.
But Cindy denied that she had anything to do with her parents' death, even though there was this friction between them.
Investigators questioned Cindy about the argument with her father the morning of the murders.
Cindy downplayed the conversation she had with her father. She said just that she was disappointed her father had said he wouldn't give her any money. But it wasn't a negative conversation.
Detectives wonder if Cindy is more guilty than she's letting on.
There was a lot of tension between Cindy and her parents. There was disapproval there.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money with the inheritance, and given her bad feelings, all these things could lead to the fact that she may have been the one that took the lives of her parents.
With suspicion swirling, police asked Cindy where she was when her parents were killed.
On Friday, she was working and had left at 4:45. They have a time clock. She had punched out.
After work, she had stopped at the store just after 5:30. She'd purchased beer and ice, and then her and Patrick at a barbecue with the neighbors.
Police work to confirm Cindy's alibi.
She was working. That was verified then. Cindy had stopped at a Quick Trip, and the Quick Trips all have video, so she was on camera at a Quick Trip near her home at the time of the homicides, not anywhere near her parents.
While Cindy is ruled out as the shooter, her husband Patrick comes into focus.
Family and friends said that Patrick did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and Patrick stood to inherit a substantial amount of money along with Cindy.
Dennis did not like her husband at all. He told me that Cindy's husband married Cindy for the money because he knew that Dennis and Myrna had money. Dennis always complained that his son-in-law, Patrick, was worthless and that he didn't want to work. He sits in place with the video games and he's too lazy to go find a job.
Investigators dig deeper into Patrick's relationship with his in-laws.
Talking to family and friends, we learned that Dennis and Myrna were upset when Patrick and Cindy got married. They asked Cindy not to marry him. They felt that he lacked motivation, and they remained unhappy with him. And I think the feeling was mutual.
According to some reports, when there was alcohol involved, he could have been a violent person.
Apparently, the Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy told Patrick that they were not going to be getting any more money. People were saying that Patrick was even more angry than Cindy, that they were being cut off financially. It was a large red flag.
Detectives also learned Patrick had the capability to pull off an execution-style hit.
Eric and other relatives were now pointing us toward Patrick, saying that he was a Marine and that he knew how to handle weapons.
It certainly moves Patrick up to the top of the list as far as suspects.
Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their son-in-law, Patrick Cowell, has motive for murder.
Patrick was a great interest to us because he did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and he stood to inherit a lot of money, so it certainly is motive. And Patrick was in the Marine Corps, so he would be an expert marksman.
When I heard that the police are starting to question him, I thought maybe after Dennis mentioned cutting them off, that might have triggered his son-in-law to kill them both.
At the police station, detectives confront Patrick about his relationship with his in-laws.
Patrick said that he was not popular in that family, that he was not comfortable with them. They weren't comfortable with him. There was kind of a cold relationship. He knew from Cindy that they were being cut off from Dennis and Myrna. He wasn't happy about it, but he denied having any involvement in the homicides.
Investigators pressed Patrick about where he was at the time of the murders.
He was without a job at the time, and basically he spent most of his day on the sofa with Xbox. We asked if he had any guns in the house, and he agreed that he did. We asked if he would turn those over to us, and he said he would.
As detectives wrap up their interview with Patrick, patrol officers are dispatched to collect the gun and gaming console, which are then sent on to the crime lab.
The gun had been analyzed and, in fact, was eliminated as the weapon used to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Also, we were able to prove through the crime lab that he was on the Xbox at the time he said he was. And so that eliminated him because he was home at the time that Dennis and Myrna were killed.
With Patrick ruled out, police are left scrambling for new suspects. The unsolved homicides leave the community on edge.
When a crime like this happens in a small town like Berry Mills, there's a lot of pressure on law enforcement to get it solved. People want answers. These aren't strangers to them. These are people they know.
People in that neighborhood were fearful. You know, the closer you are to something like that, the more concerned you are.
We were kind of scared for our lives because we didn't know why something like this would happen.
Looking for new leads, investigators dig into Dennis's business connections and the wealthy pharmacist's other ventures around town.
Dennis had a nephew, Nick Herring, who was promised a business from Dennis. They were going to open a car dealership together and actually did.
What we understood was that Nick was very familiar with running car dealerships and had done a good job.
Business was good, but then Dennis changed the deal.
As the dealership was up and running, Dennis brought Eric, his son, in to start running it with Nick, and there was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the two.
Nick was like complaining all the time, so Dennis had to go help out with the business. Dennis said they could not get along together, and he ended up buying Nick out.
At that point, Nick was quite unhappy, and there was some falling out.
Tension mounted until Dennis sold the business, leaving Nick resentful.
Nick lost a pretty substantial amount of money, so he would certainly have reason to be upset.
Could Nick have harbored a deadly desire for revenge? Police bring him into the station for questioning.
We spoke to Nick Herring, and he admitted that the relationship had soured.
Nick had said that Dennis had given him too low amount for the business and that he got cheated out of some profit. Nick felt that he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb by his uncle.
Despite the bad blood, Nick insists he's not involved in the murders.
Nick said that it was in the past that he had started his own car dealership. He was successful, and that although it was upsetting, he wouldn't hold a grudge, and he had no reason to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Nick said that he had worked until about 5:30. Then he had picked up his girlfriend, and they'd gone out to the tavern. We were able to confirm that he was at work all day, and then the bartender where they were at could confirm that he and his girlfriend had spent the evening. And so we were able to eliminate him.
Having ruled out yet another suspect, the investigation into the Cola murders hits a roadblock.
It was very disturbing because it just seemed to make no sense. Here's a couple that are a retirement age, had long, successful careers. For someone to come in and just murder them, it's senseless. We were still trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
1 week after the murders, police receive news that jolts the investigation back to life.
We get a call that a patrol car is being sent out to Eric Kula's residence for a suspicious item in the mailbox. Eric said that he had got a threatening letter. He was now extremely concerned that he was going to get killed.
Gunned down in their own home. police learn their 40-year-old son Eric has received a threatening note. Could he be the next target?
Someone had put this note in his mailbox. He was really, really concerned. This note said, "Fixed you." The message is kind of unusual, but Eric thought they'd killed his parents and were now going to come after him.
He had no idea who would have left it or where it came from.
There was an envelope, but it wasn't mailed.
The handwriting looked like it was done by someone very young. It was so strange. It was probably written that way so a handwriting analysis couldn't be done.
When it comes to Eric's safety, detectives don't take any chances.
We have to try to figure out what was going on.
We had an investigator and a camera to watch his property. We start canvassing Eric's neighborhood to see if anyone saw anything.
But with no witnesses, police are still left with no idea who placed the note.
This is perplexing. We're trying to determine, was this somebody local or was this someone from out of the area? We were very concerned.
With this new potential threat, investigators cast a wider net to find the Colas killer. But when they scour Dennis and Myrna's computers, phones, and finances, they're surprised at what they find.
We subpoenaed Dennis and Myrna's bank records and noticed that there's a check written and cashed on Dennis and Myrna's account for $50,000. It's cashed on the day after the murder, and it's made out to Eric Kula and was deposited into Eric's bank account. It seemed really strange. So you just found your parents dead, and the next day you go cash a check for $50K. It had to be looked at.
Detectives reach out to Eric, hoping to learn more details.
Eric's explanation is his dad gave it to him on the day that he had stopped over at his parents' house.
That's very interesting because of all the conversations we had with Eric, he never mentioned this, and suddenly we have a check for $50,000, and if everything was okay, why wouldn't he tell us about it?
To have a check that was deposited the day after the murders by a family member, that set off alarms for investigators.
After we find that check, we look for other checks.
We used a forensic accountant to review Eric's finances because it was quite complicated with the day trading that he was involved in. When the accountant went through it with us and explained what we were looking at, I think we almost fell off our chairs because we had no idea that this was what was going on. He told everybody that he was extremely successful with his day trading, but Eric was broke.
He was day trading, but it was a myth as far as making profit. The person looking at his financials basically called BS. She told us this guy's worth nothing. He's worth about $2,000 total. He was blowing smoke.
Then, police uncover more startling information about Eric's financial circumstances.
We learned that Eric was also going to his parents and receiving large amounts of money. Through the years, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. He led everybody to believe that he was doing so well, including his wife. Eric told her that he was making a lot of money. There was nothing to worry about, that he was just doing great.
Despite everyone's impression that Eric was this successful day trader, his parents had been funding his and his family's lifestyle.
If he was going to have to admit that to family, friends, it was going to be devastating.
Detectives learn when Dennis and Myrna stopped financially supporting their daughter, Cindy, they also cut off Eric.
We knew just shortly before Dennis and Myrna were killed, Eric found out that he was no longer getting money from his parents.
The damning evidence continues to pile up against Eric.
Dennis told me he was giving money to Eric, but basically he was done giving to both kids. He says, I need to tell them I'm done supporting them. It's about time I put my foot down and cut them off.
As investigators start to discover that Eric is not what he seems, shocking results come back from the lab.
The state crime lab did a handwriting analysis on that check for $50,000. It wasn't Dennis's signature on that check. We found out that it was Eric's handwriting, that he had forged his father's name on that check.
Everything he's told us is a lie. So things are starting to really roll toward Eric.
Police obtain a warrant to search Eric's home, hoping to find additional incriminating evidence.
We're in the basement. Among other things, was a box of envelopes in a desk drawer. The fixed U note had a security envelope, and every one of them has a different pattern for their security pattern. Lo and behold, those envelopes have the same pattern. We were able to determine that envelope in Eric's mailbox with the fixed U note came from the box of envelopes in his home. From his fire pit in his backyard, we found things that would be associated with making a fixed U note. A spring from a spiral notebook. The letter was written on spiral notebook paper. A barrel of a pen used to write the address. Those types of things are in the fire. So that fixed U note came from his house. It didn't look good for Eric.
In the search, detectives also discover a .22 caliber rifle, similar to what police believe was the murder weapon. The gun is sent to the ballistics lab for testing.
With the lies and forgery, we were pretty confident that Eric was our guy.
But at that point, Eric had an alibi for the entire time that the homicides were occurring. So we're trying to figure out how he shot Dennis and Minot.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola suspect the couple's own son, 40-year-old Eric, is the killer. But they need hard evidence to lay charges.
We went out and started re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing all the evidence that we had.
As detectives try to learn more details about Eric's connection to the crime, the ballistics results come back. Police wonder if the rifle found in Eric's home will prove to be the murder weapon.
Dennis and Myrna were shot with a .22 caliber rifle, but Eric's gun wasn't the gun that was involved in the crime.
Undeterred, detectives recheck Eric's alibi for when his parents were being murdered.
The time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Prior to the homicide, Eric said that he had helped his buddy Mike renovating a bathroom.
When we originally talked to Mike, he said that Eric had left his house about 5:30, but when we re-interviewed him, he said it's very possible it could have been earlier. Once Mike's story changed, we really thought that we were heading in the right direction.
Investigators take a closer look at Eric's timeline.
Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house to get a specific plant for his wife. At the time of the homicide, he had stopped at the first store, and that store didn't have it, so he had to go to the other store, got the plant, and produced a receipt.
Eric's receipt is stamped 6:15 p.m. The second store is located only 10 minutes from the Cola's residence. But where was Eric at 5:41 when his parents were being shot?
We checked with the garden center, the first one he went to, and they had plenty of those plants on the day and time that Eric said that they didn't have any. We also reviewed video footage, and he's not there, nor is his vehicle seen coming or leaving the parking lot. So there was a window of opportunity for Eric to commit the murders. He had no alibi for the time that the computer showed that Myrna was shot.
With Eric's alibi torn apart, detectives bring him in for another interview. They begin by confronting Eric about forging the $50,000 check.
Eric explained that he had permission from his dad to write checks out to himself, and that his dad had actually given him the check, but just was too busy, so told him to sign it himself. He told us, "I write them all the time," and that was commonplace for him to do that. It's a lie, and a provable one. He's never written one. He couldn't produce a single check that he'd ever written. He was confronted with the fixed U note, and about the envelopes and that they did come from his house. With what we found and what we knew about his financials, all of those things together are great evidence.
We just went down item after item after item after item, and Eric acted, in my opinion, desperate, and he wanted to leave.
But Eric was no longer free to go. On July 29, 2010, police charge Eric with the murder of his parents, Dennis and Myrna Cola.
What we believe started this whole crime in motion was the fact that Eric was being cut off financially. He was desperate.
Detectives pieced together how the double homicide unfolded.
We believe he went to see his mom at their home, and Myrna was sitting at the computer, and then Eric walked upstairs, got the gun that was located in the closet, came down and shot his mother, and then waited for his father to arrive. When Dennis came home, he was shot almost immediately, within seconds after he walked through that door.
After the murders, Eric wipes the gun clean and returns it to the closet.
Eric then took a check and said to himself, $50,000 will get me through until the will is settled.
After he shot his parents, he went to a garden center, bought the plant for his alibi, and went home to celebrate their anniversary dinner that night.
He's as cold-blooded as a murder-for-hire man. His parents did nothing but love him and take care of him his whole life. He's a narcissistic little son of a bitch and thought that his dad owed him a living.
Eric Cola's arrest stuns the community.
Everyone thought that he was this golden child, that he had a great relationship with his parents, that he was this successful day trader. That he could have done this, people were shocked.
I would have never expected Eric to do this. The way Dennis talked about him, always bragged about his son, and I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
In June 2012, 2 years after Dennis and Myrna Cola were killed, a jury finds their son Eric guilty of intentional murder.
His sister, Cindy, during the sentencing hearing, was sobbing, and she begged the judge in that courtroom to make sure justice was done that day.
Eric Cola is sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 6 years for forgery.
Many times I've thought about how somebody could do that, and I just simply can't fathom it. I guess we all lose a bit of our innocence when this kind of thing happens.
Myrna and Dennis are still dearly missed by their family and friends.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would